Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to present you the objective of the meeting. Why we are going what is the idea of the meeting? Why we wanted to make this kind of debate? Thinking with people from LEREPS, we were thinking about the importance of environment on agriculture. I think for both countries, for France and for Brazil, agriculture and environment are very important today. I think on people working with both, it's a very big preoccupation today. And here in Brazil, I was listening a lot of things about agriculture, about environment. French people think a lot of things about Brazil, about environment in Brazil. Brazilian people telling a lot of things about French people and European people. And I thought it was very important to have this kind of debate, of conversation about different way of thinking and to know what the people from the other country were thinking about agriculture and environment living, working together. So the objective of this is to have some kind of debate, to listening from people from another country, maybe with different kind of concepts, of ideas, and to debate. So I'm going to present, this is the first one. The objective is to have one every semester. So probably the next one will be in November or December, and every 6 months to make another one. So we're working together. So I'm going to present UFMS on ESAN. So it's the University of Mato Grosso do Sul in the Midwest of Brazil. So in the middle of agriculture production, the biggest agriculture production area in Brazil. On the faculty of ESAN, it's a business faculty. So we're working about business, economy, and accountability. On LEREPS, I think Michael can present better after that. LEREPS, it's a junction of different universities.
Yes, so the research department LEREPS is a research department co-hosted by different higher education universities, institutions. So the School for Political Studies, the University of Toulouse 2, the University of Toulouse 1 and Toulouse 3, and the Esse, which is a higher education institution in charge of training agricultural teachers for high schools. In this research department, the goal is to look at the conditions for collective action, and we focus our research on three areas: the governance of financial systems, the governance of natural resources, and the governance of territories. Today, for this debate on ecosystem services, we have three brilliant guests, two from France, one from Brazil. The first guest from France is Dr. Nicolas Galaï. Nicolas is with Esse, the institution in charge of training higher education agricultural teachers, and is also the lead of the master program Agro-Food Chain. His research work focuses on a very specific ecosystem service, pollination, and so he looks at all anything related to bees. So welcome to Dr. Nicolas Galaï, and thank you very much for joining us. Our second guest is Dr. Marcos Yenk. Marcos is with the Institute of Education and Research in Sao Paulo in Brazil. He's a professor of global agribusiness, and he also sits in various chairs of agri-food companies. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to this debate. And our third guest is Dr. Géraldine Froger, who works with the University of Toulouse too in France. She leads the master program Ecological Economics and Sustainable Development, and her research work focuses mostly on payments for ecosystem services. Once again, thank you very much for joining us and welcome. So the seminar will be organized in two parts. They will first make a short presentation between 10 and 15 minutes. And then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions via the chat. So do not hesitate to write your questions in English, French, or Portuguese. We'll make sure to translate and share your questions. And then the debate will start and will be facilitated by Olivier.
So hello everyone, thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to present it here. I just want to be sure that you can see my presentation.
Yes.
So, I decided this afternoon to present kind of summary of my work on economic valuation of ecosystem services, and try to respond to the questions why we do economic valuation of ecosystem services for agriculture. To me, it sounds evident, but maybe not for everyone. And this is why I like to present something like on this, and I hope that it will give some point for the debate after that. So first, so we talk about ecosystem services. So what is an ecosystem service? If I take the definition of Fisher et al. In 2009, say an ecosystem services are the aspect of ecosystems utilized, which is actively or passively to produce human well-being. So it means that when we talk about ecosystem services, first we talk about ecosystems. So an ecosystem, it is defined, you can find many definitions of ecosystem. So you can use this one, the simplest one, which is a dynamic complex of plants, animals, communities of microorganisms, and the non-living environment interacting as a functional unit. So you have an ecosystem, it can be just a forest, it can be a lake, an ocean, everything you can define an ecosystem that is a dynamic complex of different components. And these different components are interacting together, which give some what we call ecological function, which are biological processes of the functioning between these different components of the nature. So you have the trees that is growing. In growing, you take some, I don't know, some water from the soil. You will take some CO2 or other gas. You will take everything from the natural environment around it. It will provide some service to the nature also as habitat for different animals. You will provide shadow, etc. Many things to the environment. Then you have kind of, all these processes inside the ecosystem that will only be beneficial for the ecosystems. So we say that all this process is a nature-centered part of the process. So from that ecological function, so when the trees is growing, is giving some, is taking from CO2, etc. In doing this, it will provide services to humans, but it's indirect. It's not a kind of the tree that say, oh, I will help human. No, it's not like the case, okay? The tree is growing for himself, as the bees are pollinating for themselves. Everything, the nature is working for themselves, but they can create what we can call, as economists, some externalities. Then these externalities are categorized in three categories. So you have provisioning services, regulating services, and cultural services. Provisioning services is the main famous, is the water, the food that we eat directly, everything that we consume directly for us. Second category is the regulating services. It's something that is not, we don't consume directly, but we use unconsciously, or maybe we use it in our activity. It's like providing the regulating service, provide flood control, for example, or disease control. It's a kind of natural protection that provide the nature. but also as the maintaining of the quality of the air and the soil. Like I say, trees are eating CO2, then it's help us to it's providing a regulating service that help us to maintain the air quality, for example. And the last category is cultural services, everything that is immaterial production for the ecosystem, from the ecosystem services, as for example, the aesthetic of landscape and whole amenities like that. And all these are ecosystem services because they participate to our human well-being, as explained Fisher in this definition, which means also that if these services is not, if the human are not beneficiaries of these services, it means that it's not an ecosystem services. It's just in the first part of this schema, which is nature-based process. Okay, so here today we talk about ecosystem services and agriculture. So all ecosystem services contribute to agriculture. Here I'm trying to use a schema from Zhang et al. A paper that tried first to schematize all this interaction, and I try to actualize this schema. Then you can see in the center of the schema what we call the agricultural ecosystem. So we talk about ecosystems here. Here it is ecosystem. Then in the ecosystem, agricultural ecosystem is also an ecosystem. A field is an ecosystem in itself. Then this agricultural ecosystem will provide ecological function, the soil fertility, nutrient cycling, water provision, etc., which means all the biological process that will support the other categories. Then this ecological function will impact regulating services as the soil retention, pollination, dung burial, natural control, etc. And then in doing this, ecological function will also provide provisioning service as production of food, but fiber and fuel. They will also participate to another category, the cultural services, or I can summarize it also in non-marketed services as the water supply, climate change mitigation, aesthetic landscape, and wildlife habitat. Okay, then we have a kind of positive interaction between the nature and our benefits. You can also have negative one as what we call ecosystem disservices. Everything that will impact negatively the agricultural ecosystem as pest damage, competition for water, competition for pollination, etc. You can also, as we define agricultural ecosystem as an ecosystem in itself, it means that it will also provide ecosystem disservices as the habitat loss, nutrient runoff, and all the use of pesticide that eliminates some non-targeted species. And last point, you have here, as you can see in this schema, you have a kind of negative joint production between ecosystem disservices produced by ecosystem and the ecosystem disservices used in the agricultural ecosystems. Is the case of, for example, of pesticide and pollination. How we talk about this after that, but we use pesticide to produce more crops. We use pollination to improve yield, and finally we have one input that will degrade the other inputs, which is pesticide degrading the pollination. So you kind of trade off to take between both use. So then you can see here we have three production of this ecosystem. So three main ecosystem services that will participate to our economy. We have first the provisioning services, which are all goods that are marketed from the agricultural production and is benefiting to the farmer. You have also the non-marketed services or cultural services that can be considered a collective advantage in the sense that they will benefit to the society at large and not only to the farmer. And you have also another point, which is the loss in biodiversity and production due to use of pesticide and herbicide. So what this implies, finally? This implies, so what are the three main stakes, in maintaining this interaction? So firstly, when we talk about marketed production that will benefit to the farmer, the thing is that it's okay. It means production of ecosystem services will benefit directly to the farmer. So it should incent directly the farmers to maintain the kind of interaction, maintain the the link between nature and their production in the long term, just because finally it participates to this product to its benefit directly. However, these marginal revenues due to nature is not always understood by local actors. So this creates a kind of issues. Another point that is interesting to apprehend is like, we talk about collective advantage, which is perfect for the society. However, however, the thing is that sometimes this collective advantage should be managed by only one person, which is the farmer, and is not compensated for that. So it needs to expend some energy to protect, to improve this collective advantage, but it's not remunerated for that. So it's risky for him. He could be born at a time, okay? So it is a social responsibility, but it's alone to have it. So he will wait from government to endorse this responsibility. This is another question. Oh, we can incent also the farmer on the collectivity of farmer to improve this collective advantage. Last point, like stakes, finally, is that we have a loss in biodiversity. Like the use of chemical is perceived as an input that promotes yield. So it's perfect. Since many years in Europe, we use pesticide and herbicide because it improves our yield. We produce more and more. And it was perfect because we produce more. However, we don't take into account the negative joint production with ecosystem services. And this trade-off is not well perceived by farmers. And more importantly, the cost is not known by farmers. So you have here three stakes, three issues finally, where we need maybe, to my point, economic valuation, because economic valuation can help to overcome these issues by providing necessary information. So first information, but also to guide a kind of cost-benefit analysis, and also to aggregate the different benefits from the whole ecosystem services provided by agroecosystems. So for example, this measure will help public stakeholders to set efficient public policy, but also private stakeholders by providing cost efficiency information on maintaining ecosystems. Let me take an example to finish my before finishing my presentation. The example of pollinators, as explained Michael, it is one of my specialties, so the economic valuation of pollination services. So pollinators is considered by a regulation service. This regulation service indirectly will participate to the provisioning service to produce food, mainly food, okay, but also fuel in a part. It also participates to non-marketed service because pollinators will increase the yield of wild flora, the wild plant, then it will increase the biodiversity and also to increase animal diversity, etc. So it means they participate to the aesthetic landscape. And as I said before, the pollination is at stake because it's a service that is declining around the world because mainly of the use of chemicals, but not only, also because we're just destroying their habitats, natural habitats, where because they are also invasive species of the Africanized bees, etc. So then, for all this reason, it is important to evaluate this service. It's what we've done. Sorry. Firstly, in trying to evaluate the pollination service as a provider of service, a provisioning service. So first, what are the impact of these ecosystem services on the private benefits of farmers? And then for that, we first try to evaluate, to estimate the production of pollinators among the whole world global food production. And then we can see that it participates to 75% of crop species directly using the human food in the world. So 75% of the crop species that we eat directly are dependent on these bees. Then then we translate this in economic monetary money. So what you can see in this table. So here the third column is called insect pollination economic value. You can see the total value, the contribution, finally, of the pollinators on the agricultural production. So it means 153 billion euros is the value of the contribution of pollinators, which represent almost 10% of all the world agricultural GDP. But pollinators, the impact of pollinators is not only measured as a contribution. It can be also measured using the traditional tools of analysis in economics, which is this diagram of, you can see this diagram of supply and demand. So here you can see that the demand for food and you have this diagram, so quantities at the axis and price at the ordinate, and you have the supply curve at 0 before decline of pollinators, and supply 1, which is after decline of pollinators. And if you look at the equilibrium before and after, you can see that the price of crops finally at the equilibrium will increase a lot after the pollinator decline. So a pollinator decline will also impact the price of all crops in the economy finally. Second kind of evaluation is, okay, they participate to production of food, but not only, they participate to a cultural service, which is the aesthetic of landscape. And then it's what we do with colleagues. Here you can see insect pollinators, they contribute to white flora, as I said, which in turn contribute to aesthetic of landscapes. So this benefit will disappear if pollinators disappear. So what is the value of this service? How we can evaluate it? So for that, we in the region of France, not far from Toulouse, we realized a choice experiment combined with a deliberation, but I will just present the choice experiment here. So choice experiments means we interview almost 250 people and ask them to choose between different scenarios, as you can see in this example of choice card. And in each scenario, they will also pay a kind of monetary amount each year to protect, means to have this scenario. So if I'm here, you have 3 scenarios. I will select scenario 12, 0, or 13. I will prefer, if I choose the 13 one, I will pay each year 25 euros per year. And I will have a very important diversity of fruit and legume and vegetables, good quality of strawberry, and but a very low diversity of wild flora, and a lot of bee species. So then we doing this, we can evaluate the value, the willingness to pay of people to protect wild pollinators. And you can see here that the total value willingness to pay per year for one household to protect pollinators in order to maintain all the services, which are variety of local fruit and vegetable, the quality of local fruit and vegetable, the diversity of wild flora, and the percentage of extant pollinators. So all these services are measured here, and it's about more than 500 euros. And we can see also that the most important services offered by pollinators is the one of percentage of extant pollinators, means protecting pollinators just because they are pollinators, what we call in economics existence value. And the last work can like to present also, it's now we say that there is kind of negative joint production between pollinators and use of pesticides. So there is a trade-off for the farmers that need to decide between I should use pollination or I should use pesticide. In general, they use both finally. But what is the good? What should be the good quantity of one and the other? And we do a kind of analytical model to evaluate, to try to analyze this point where finally we say that insect pollinators are not only bees, they are also wild bees. And these white bees, generally, they are more vulnerable than just honeybees, because first they are more vulnerable to pesticide, but also finally honeybees are livestock, so we can finally manage the quantity of honeybees each year. There is a market of queen, etc. So beekeepers can maintain their quantity and maintain their quantity of honeybees, because they can buy it, sell it, etc., which is not the case with white bees. So then we try to analyze the possible efficient choices for farmers between using different combination of honeybees, white bees, and pesticide. To find a model here, I will just show you the one of the main results, which is it's not, you cannot believe it, but it's the supply curve. So it's not the same size that the other one. You can see it's like different specific supply curve. Where the supply curve here, which means it represents, as you know, the marginal cost of the farmers to produce here a crop of sunflower, for example. What is interesting is that finally you have 2 points, YW and YB. YW is the use of only white bees. Between YW and YB, you use a mixed combination between white bees and honeybees. And after the YB, you have only honeybees, which means that finally, in parallel, the farmer is using pesticide. So the more you produce, the more you use pesticide, and the more you lose white bees. So here means when you see this curve decreasing, it means that you have white bees that are dying. And so it means only honeybees are remaining. So what we can see here is that, to synthesize it, is that it would be more efficient for farmers if you consider the bees more than pesticide, firstly. So it demonstrated this. It is even more efficient if the farmers give more place to the synergy between bees and honeybees and white bees. Means it's better when you have a combination of white bees and honeybees, and you can see it. And it also, if the farmer give more more place, or you can favorize the small scale agriculture compared to the large scale one, means it's better. You can see here if productions remain small, and here you can have better yield, better benefits, and also you can have also better at a better price. Okay, I see the time is running. Maybe too long. Okay.
Thank you very much, Nicolas.
Let me. I have only one more slide. I just try to. I don't know why it's not working. You got me?
Very fast, because we already passed the time. So just to conclude.
Okay. I don't know why I have a problem. I have a problem with my computer. Oh no. Mince. Okay, I'm sorry, I cannot. So just to conclude, okay, just to say, I will not show you the presentation, but two things. First, okay, we can see that we can evaluate ecosystem services, but finally, when we evaluate ecosystem services, it means we have different value, and among the value, you have what we call direct value, direct use value, and indirect and non-use value. So you have the use value, non-use value, and generally concentrate the evaluation in use value and not on non-use value. So it means yes for evaluating the ecosystem services, but be careful, because the value we have certainly is not complete. Is not included all the different value an ecosystem services provide. And the last thing is when you have an ecosystem, finally what's happened, an ecosystem provides many ecosystem services. So just only focuses on one ecosystem services is not complete, is not perfect. So you need to also integrate include in your evaluation not the ecosystem services, but the ecosystem and the ecological function that provide these different ecosystem services if you want to have an efficient management of your ecosystem. So thank you for your attention, and sorry.
Thank you very much.
More time.
It was very complete. I really like the connection between the concept and then the research. I guess for all the students here, it was very insightful. We have one question, so briefly.
Michael, I think that as we passed a little the time, I think we're going to make the second presentation. And maybe we're going to ask the questions after. What do you think?
All right, that works. So our second presentation is conducted by Dr. Marco Sienk. You should have the rights to share your screen.
Okay.
If you want to share your screen.
So, bon dia, bonjour. It's a pleasure to be with you, especially considering that most of you come from Mato Grosso do Sul, which is a great state and a place that I love. I love very much what happens in Mato Grosso do Sul in terms of agriculture, Pantanal, and everything. And also a very big pleasure to be with you from Toulouse. I studied in Montpellier during almost 3 years. I did my master's in Montpellier, so I love south of France, and I like Toulouse and the whole region, like Languedoc and other regions. So it's a big pleasure to be with you. I did my master's about the common agricultural policy. So that's why I've been studying France and in Europe and almost 30 years ago, the relations of Brazil, France, in Europe in terms of the regulations, international regulations, especially the GATT system and the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So it's a pleasure to be with you again. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening between agriculture and environment in Brazil. I think this is one of the hot topics here in Brazil today, especially related to the issue of the Amazon biome and the Amazon forest. And let me start saying I'm going to share with you only 4 slides, but before showing those slides, I'd like to introduce the situation today. I believe that the issues related to environment and to deforestation have a new approach today, a very changing approach. A few years ago, the issue of deforestation and Amazon was confined to agriculture producers, NGOs, and it was most of the time this was a local issue here in Brazil. It was not a global issue. Today, there's a complete change of perception. First of all, I believe that the most important and the most known topic when we talk about Brazil everywhere in the world is deforestation, is the Amazon. The Amazon can put Brazil in the global map, but can also put Brazil out of the global map. So there's a complete change of perception. It's not anymore only an agro-environmental issue, but it's an issue that has a lot of pressure coming from public opinion, from supermarkets, from banks, from suppliers, from the European Union and the governments, and President Macron, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a completely different approach, and we need to understand what are the impacts of this problem. The impacts can be related to reputational issues, which is happening today because of the deforestation, also the capitalization of the companies, but doesn't touch very much trade. And doesn't touch trade because Brazil is today the 3rd largest exporter of agri-food products in the world, just after US and Europe. And it's growing much faster, but not only growing very fast, but also growing in new directions. When I did my master's in France, our first client was Europe. Europe represented at that time almost 50% of Brazilian exports of agri-food products. In 2000, we exported $20 billion per year, and Europe was $10 billion. Today, Europe represents only 15%, 15% of our exports. And 66% go to Asia. And almost 40% go to China, which means that there is a new destination, there's a new region that's receiving our commodities. And we are now exporting $100 billion. And we've been growing in other products. In 20, 30 years ago, we were very big in coffee or sugar, or now it's soy, corn, cotton, beef, chicken, pork, cellulose, ethanol. So there's a new variety of commodities where Brazil is a leading country, and most of those commodities go to Asia, not to Europe anymore. So there's an issue here that trade is not reducing, trade is growing, and growing fast, because most of those new regions in Asia, they need commodities, especially China. China is the first destination for soy, for cotton, for sugar, for beef, for chicken. And China wants to buy those commodities, especially after the pandemic. In 2020, we had the second best year of exports ever in agri-food products. So we needed to understand there is a new dynamic here. And what Europe thinks about Brazil could not be the same as Asia. In Europe, there's a huge concern about environmental issues today and climate change. In Asia, they are also concerned, but they are more concerned about food security and food safety. So there's a different approach here. But the fact is that Brazil can be, in terms of agriculture and environment, Brazil can be the villain and Brazil can be the solution. And this is what's very impactful, very, very important for us. We are the villains because we are not controlling deforestation. This is the main problem we have today. We are still deforesting 1 million hectares per year. Brazil has 850 million hectares, and deforestation is around today 1 million hectares, and it has been growing in the last 3-4 years. If we look in the long term, Brazil has been reducing deforestation in general, but in the last 4 years, because of the lack of control, lack of fiscalization, we have a growing situation, especially in the Amazon, So this is a problem because it's a very high index of deforestation, and the problem is that 98% of the deforestation is illegal. Illegal means that it's not following the Brazilian law. So this is not a problem that comes from the pressure of President Macron or from Biden or from Xi Jinping. This is a Brazilian issue. We are not respecting the law, and we have a forest code that's very, very ambitious, very strict. Farmers in Brazil, they needed to preserve 20% of the land in forest, in natural reserves in the south, 35% in the Cerrados, and 80% in the Amazon. In the Amazon, legally, if you want to deforestate, can only deforestate 20% of the property. 80% needs to be legal reserve, which means natural reserve. So the law is very strict. The problem is that there is a lot of land that have no property. There's invasions of natural parks. There's invasion of indigenous areas. There's rural settlements that happens there in the last 30 years, because 30 years ago, The order was to occupy the Amazon, was not to preserve the Amazon. So there's a complete change of mind about the Amazon. In the 80s, we had to occupy the Amazon. We have official programs to push people to the forest, to occupy the forest. And most of these people, they have no land titles. They are not following the Brazilian forest code. And they are invading, because the value of the forest for most of the people is not the forest as it is. It's the wood, it's the minerals, it's the possibility to produce beef. So these kind of things are the big problem of Brazil today. I would say the most important problem related to the Brazilian risk in the financial markets come from ESG and come from this problem of different speeds of agriculture. You have in one side of the country, you have a very modern agriculture, very productive. In the other part of the country, we have deforestation, we have invasion of natural reserves, indigenous land, we have the lack of application of the forest code, and we have in many areas no titles yet, a problem of titles in the land, the property, the tenure of the land. So this is an issue, a very important issue for us. So let me share with you a few slides about that. Okay, so can you see my slides?
Yes,
Yeah,
it works very well.
Thank you. So, okay, so here is the expansion of the Brazilian frontier. Because talking about that, I don't know if you are familiar with the Brazilian map, but this is the Brazilian biomas, correct? So you have here in this is 50% of Brazil is the Amazon bioma, correct? Is the 85% of the Amazon bioma is conserved, is natural reserves. But there is 15%, 17% of occupation here especially in the borders of the biome, correct? The yellow area is the Cerrados. The Cerrados is the main place where we had expansion of agriculture in the last 30 years. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Brazilian agriculture was confined in the close to the ocean, to the Atlantic Ocean here. And we had agriculture based on tropical products like sugarcane, like coffee, like cocoa. This was the beginning of the history of Brazil. During 450 years after the Portuguese, Brazilian agriculture was very close to the coasts. Then we had the expansion to the west of the South states. And then we had an important migration of farmers and very successful migration in agricultural terms to the Cerrados. So in the 70s, we came to Mato Grosso do Sul and to Goiás and to Mato Grosso, south of Mato Grosso. Mato Grosso today is the #1 agricultural state in Brazil. But the occupation of Mato Grosso happened in the 70s and in the 80s. It's very, very short time ago, see, compared to what happens in France or in UK, or you see where you have thousands of years of agriculture. No, here we have these areas we were able to occupy only in the last 40 years. And the reason is because before of that, the Cerrados are very poor soils and lots of different diseases and plagues, and there was no technology to go there. So Brazil was a pioneer in developing technology for those areas. And the technology is very, very incredible today. For example, in most of these areas, we are planting 2 crops a year without irrigation, which means that we can plant soy and corn, or soy and cotton. In some areas, soy and corn and cattle, 3 crops a year without irrigation. For example, if France wants to produce soybeans to be self-sufficient, as it was suggested by Macron, France would be producing 2.7, 2.8 tons per hectare maximum. In Brazil, we are producing 3.4 tons per hectare of soy and 5.3 tons per hectare of corn in the same hectare in most of these regions. So we are producing 3 to 4 times more grains per hectare than in France. And this will not change because France is not a tropical country. And the tropical country has much more water, much more sun, so we can produce much more. Our yields are today much higher than the yields in France in products like corn or soy. So this is happening especially in the Center West. And the last frontier is here, is what we call the Mato Piba, the states of Tocantins, Piauí, Maranhão, and Bahia. So Brazil is occupying most of the land with agriculture, but agriculture in total represents 30% of the land. So this map is just to show where agriculture is, but we still have most of the territory covered by the Amazon. So in the Amazon, there's 85% of conservation, but in the Cerrados, it's reducing a lot. So this is the first map. So this is what I'd like to show you. So Brazil has 70 million hectares of agriculture, 170 million hectares of pastures. Most of the occupation today comes on pasture areas, not in the native vegetation. This is what we call ILPF, which is the Integração Lavoura Pecuária Floresta, the crop livestock forest integration, which is the possibility to move agriculture into pasture areas. Pasture areas are 2.5 times agricultural areas. So there's a lot of space here to do agriculture without any deforestation. But then you ask me why deforestation is happening. Deforestation is happening because it's illegal. And this is, I would say, the most important problem of Brazil is the application of the Brazilian law in places where deforestation is still happening. And it's happening in indigenous land, it's happening in rural settlement areas, in the forest, and it's happening also in public parks and also in private land. So there is a problem of implementation of the law here. This is the situation of deforestation. Used to be much higher in 2000, etc. But then we had a big control of deforestation from 2004 to 2012. 2012 was the lowest level ever, which is 460,000 hectares per year. And then we are back to 1 million hectares, 10,000 square kilometers per year. 11,000 even. So this is what's the big concern of the world today about Brazil, relates to this situation where we are growing again in the last years here, correct? And where this deforestation is happening: in Pará state, in Mato Grosso, in Amazonas, and in Rondônia, correct? So it's very concentrated here, Pará, Mato Grosso, Rondônia, and Amazon. These are the areas where we have today illegal deforestation, correct? So this is the right situation. There's a lot of, every day there are pieces in the journals about Brazil and lots of stories, but very few people understand the reasons, the real reasons of what's happening here in the Amazon. And I would say that most of the problems are problems related to the Brazilian application of the law, to the regularization of the land titles, and to the application of the forest code. So just to make a synthesis about what Brazil is in terms of agriculture and environment. Brazil is the villain, Brazil is the victim, and Brazil is the solution. And we have all three situations. We are the villain when we see that agriculture and especially livestock, cattle, emit largest amount of greenhouse gases, correct? Brazil being the first world exporter of beef, for sure this is related to strong emissions. But the big problem is not the emissions of the cattle, because we know that it's possible to have zero carbon emissions in cattle. Embrapa has been developing, and also some slaughterhouses like Marfrig, they are producing zero emissions cattle. Beef, no? Zero emissions beef, which is, you can do that just with the management, the right management of the cattle and the pastures. The pastures are absorbing CO2 and the cattle is emitting CO2. So there's a balance here that we can manage through technology. So this is not the problem. The problem is deforestation. If deforestation grows in Brazil, Brazilian emissions grow too. See, Brazil emits much less than US, Europe, or China, but 50–60% of the Brazilian emissions are related to deforestation, and deforestation is a problem that makes us a villain. But we are also victim in terms of the environment because of climate change. We are seeing temperature rises, dry seasons, extreme weather events in Brazil. The burnings we had in the last years are extremely related to climate change. So this is what makes agriculture a victim, and this is why agriculture needs to be very, very concerned about climate change. And also Brazil have very, very strong solutions for climate change. And the solutions are what? Double crop, 2 crops a year, 3 crops a year. So if you are producing 3 crops a year, you are automatically reducing the pressure of deforestation. We need much less land to produce the same amount of product today than 30–40 years ago, because we are double cropping, because we have a technology here that we call no tillage, plantio direto, which means that we don't revolve the land to produce. We just plant over the last crop. So we can produce soy and immediately produce corn, and then we can produce pastures without revolving the soil like you do in temperate climates, that you have the winter and ice and the snow. In tropical areas, you don't need to revolve the soil. So that this is very good for conservation. We have also integrated crop livestock programs that are growing very fast. We already had 15 million hectares of crop livestock integration, so producing crops and cattle in the same area, in the same year. Restoration of degraded areas, there's a huge possibility here, lots of programs. New technologies, renewable energy. Brazil has 40% of the Brazilian energy matrix come from renewables in Brazil, come from water, wind, solar, and biomass. We are very strong in water, electricity, so hydroelectricity. We are becoming very strong now in solar. Wind not so much, but biomass. For example, sugarcane in Brazil is for production of sugar, but most of the sugarcane now is used for ethanol, which is a biofuel, and also for bioelectricity, so cogeneration. So we have lots of technologies that are aligned to climate change goals in terms of mitigating climate change and SDGs and things like that. There is also a movement in the direction of trying to find solutions for the Amazon forest as it is, what we call the bioeconomy. So giving value to the forest in products like cocoa, like acai. Acai, I think you know everywhere today, it's a product from the Amazon. Monitoring most of the big slaughterhouses and the big trading grain trading companies like Cargill and ADM and Bunge and Maggi and Kofco, they all have today programs of monitoring and traceability of products, so mapping the origin of the product. So for example, to sell meat to Europe, it's impossible to sell meat to Europe if you don't track back to the producer where the cattle comes from. And if it comes from an area where there is deforestation, the producer that is in the blacklist of deforestation, there's today a lot of systems coming into place, not for all companies, but growing pressure for geo-monitoring, for certification, for traceability. There is very interesting programs of jurisdictional approaches, like, for example, areas where you have everything controlled in terms of ESG. ESG is growing very fast in the market, and the carbon markets are also coming. So I see today many solutions coming from the private sector in Brazil, and the companies are moving, and I am directly involved with the strategy of at least 3 or 4 companies here in Brazil myself. But unfortunately, the government is not doing its role, correct? So we are seeing, unfortunately, a lack of government, a lack of action in terms of, for example, let's say, controlling fiscalization of deforestation in the Amazon, the implementation of the forest code in all the states. For example, Mato Grosso do Sul are better, much better than, for example, Pará or Rondônia, correct? In terms of the implementation of the forest code. And also we have problems of land titles, especially in the northeast states of Brazil. So what I'm going to tell you here is that this is not a simple issue. It's an issue that has many good things, many good results. Probably in tropical areas in the world, there's no other country like Brazil in terms of productivity. There's no other example. And I've been living in Asia now for almost 5 years. I've been visiting agriculture in all countries in Asia. I never saw any country that has the same level of productivity and organization of the production like Brazil. But on the other side, there is still deforestation, and there is still many problems related to the application of the law, which makes the situation a very heterogeneous situation. But we can solve these problems if we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcos. You kind of started the discussion because you opened you started to make comparisons with other countries. So it's very promising. I really liked also starting the debate about the role of the private sector and the government. That's something that emerged that appeared in the questions. So we'll come back to that for sure. Maybe we can jump to the third discussion. Geraldine, I'm very sorry. Is it possible to be a bit synthetic so that we can go to the debate, or what do you think? Would you like to share a few words?
Yes, I'd like.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I'd like.
Thank you very much.
I make my possible, indeed, to be short.
Thanks.
So, hello, bon dia, bonjour. My presentation will focus on payments for environmental or ecosystem services, PES, after. The theoretical basis of my research is socio-ecological economics, and its field is biodiversity. And I have worked more particularly on Costa Rica. The starting point is a well-known definition of wonder.
Would you like to share
no slides. No slides. Much fluid. So a PES is first a voluntary transaction where 2 well-defined environmental services, ES after, or a land use likely to secure that service. 3 is being bought by a minimum 1 ES buyer. 4 from a minimum 1 ES provider. 5 if and only if the environmental services provider secures environmental services provision. So PES is a voluntary negotiated framework which distinguishes it from command and control measures. Ecosystem services are the benefits that ecosystem provides to humans. They refer to provisioning, regulating, cultural and life support services, as Nicola has said. And according to Costa Rica forestry law, ES are biodiversity, carbon sequestration, water resources, and landscape beauty. Let's take a simple example in 1 minute, that of Vitel in France. Vitel, ES buyer, has set up contracts with farmer, ES providers, to preserve the quality of its water sources. The aim is to reduce nitrate levels in the water and remove all traces of pesticides. The ES provision is water quality. Farmers are paid to change their practices according to a set of specifications. So my research has focused on the institutional nature of PES, the diversity and complexity and institutional arrangements, and the role of the state in these arrangements, and the private sector too. In particular, to position PES in relation to a wider field of environmental policy instruments, and to position the different types of PES in relation to each other. And whatever the form of PES, it is about buying for practices that provide an ES. Providers are voluntary, they are not constrained by law or regulation, and my research has identified 4 types of PES. First, voluntary and direct PES. There are voluntary agreements between buyers who are direct users of ES and the ES providers. Several examples: private contracts and bilateral agreements, Vitel, conservancies in Namibia, environmental certification, and so on. And this PES scheme corresponds to the ideal type of Wunder's definition. Secondly, voluntary and indirect PES. There are agreements where the voluntary buyers are not necessarily direct users of the ES. Several examples: voluntary consumer contribution, like donation mechanism, conservation pacts in Madagascar, the EB project in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Just for example, the EB project is a reforestation project. The ES provision is carbon sequestration. The buyer is a local private company, Novacell, and the project is financed by selling carbon credits on the international market. The providers are the local communities that reforest the area. Thirdly, mandatory and direct PES. The contribution of environmental services buyers are not voluntary, but mandatory. Buyers are direct users of the ES, and several examples: tax on water consumption, such as in New York, or preservation of hydrological resources in the forests of the states of Mexico. Fourth, mandatory and indirect PES. The contributions of ES buyers are mandatory. Buyers are not necessarily direct users of ES. Several examples, such as eco-taxes in Costa Rica, public subsidies, such as agri-environmental measures of the Common Agricultural Policy. In Costa Rica, the program of payments for environmental services aims to reduce deforestation. The ES providers are forest owners and farmers. 3 possible actions: reforestation, sustainable forest management, agroforestry, and preservation of an area. a tax is levied on the sale of fossil fuels. It is collected by the state and paid back to environmental services providers. This PES scheme is far from the ideal type of Wunder's definition. My research has also focused on the effects of PES. And for Wunder, PES have several advantages in response to the shortcomings of traditional public policies, command and control regulations. PES allow land use change, mobilize new sources of funding to respond to the weakness of public budgets, implement a control relationship on pragmatic grounds, better environmental efficiency, without adding regulation or administrative instruments. There are also advantages in terms of poverty elevation. My research questions these advantages. It has focused on the institutional performance of PES, in particular in Costa Rica and the Democratic Republic of Congo. It aims to account for the links between the effects of PES and their institutional context. In terms of environmental effectiveness, additionality can be questioned. Environmental effectiveness is more pragmatic with no guarantee that environmental objectives will be met. Several leakage effects have also been observed. Finally, paying for the stop of illegal practices raises ethical problems, pay to respect the law. And there is sometimes a risk of ecological blackmail. The economic efficiency of PES is also questioned. In theory, transaction costs should be reduced. This is far from being the case both for the Costa Rican program and the EB project. And finally, we have discussed the effects of PES in terms of poverty elevation. So in conclusion, Costa Rica is a country with a high institutional density. The state is present. Public environmental policy experiments have been conducted over several decades. The PES program has a strong legitimacy and contributes to an image of a green economy. And the Costa Rican program has reduced the vulnerability of environmental services providers without necessarily reducing the poverty of the poorest communities. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a country with a low institutional density. The state is fragile. Environmental and development policies are extroverted and externalized, and the environmental effectiveness of the EB project is limited. It has not reduced poverty or vulnerability. I made very short, especially to the debate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It flowed very well because Marco started to question the role of the government, and you follow up with public policies. So I'm pretty sure it's going to start some good questions and debate. But now my role is over, and I leave the floor to Olivier, who's going to facilitate the debate and share the questions and guide the debate. Thank you very much.
Michael, no, your role is not finished. I think you can help me also. Okay, I'm going to tell the main question we have. We have one from Leandro. It was for Marcus. He was telling that some investment funds of some major players, global players, such as Carrefour, PepsiCo, Unilever, and others, that threatens to reduce investment in Brazil if the country doesn't change in policies about deforestation and other sustainability contents. So he asked, in your point of view, how much of this is possible, and how much is just economic or strategic pressure. Resuming, all the pressure from outside, from big company, it's just economic or strategic pressures, or it's just a real preoccupation on environment.
Okay, thank you. But in terms of the issue of what happens with these pressures, let's remember that Carrefour or Casino, which are the major supermarkets here in Brazil, or PepsiCo or Unilever, they are end consumer. They are acting downstreams, and they are end consumer companies, companies related to end consumers, and they are making pressure on companies like Cargill, ADM, Bunge, Cofco, JBS, Marfrig, correct? So what we are seeing today is that those companies that are more linked to the producers, so processing companies that are working with producers, they are receiving pressure from companies like Carrefour, PepsiCo, Unilever, to make sure that what those companies downstream want is to assure that the soy or corn or beef that they are buying, they are selling to the consumers, are not related to deforestation, correct? They want zero deforestation supply chains. And they are pressuring Cargill, ADM, the upstream companies, to assure that the products that are sold are zero deforestation. And this pressure is happening. So I believe that the first answer to this question is those companies upstream from PepsiCo, Carrefour, they are trying to do geo-monitoring of the products. They are doing certifications, and they are doing traceability more and more. And this is good in terms of what the consumer wants, especially in Europe. But the problem is that if the public policy doesn't go ahead, doesn't move, we risk to have what I call a double track agriculture. Here in Brazil, we have, unfortunately, we have a situation in many parts of the country, which are that we have favelas, very poor communities, as we know, and inside or close to favelas, like in Rio de Janeiro, you have big condos, correct? People living in condos that are protected by walls and by cameras, and inside the condo, everything works well, correct? Security, healthy people, etc. But around those condos, we have situations of poverty and situations where there's no law enforcement and violence and things like that. Unfortunately, what could happen with those pressures is the same situation in the forest. Cargill will buy a zero deforestation supply chain. JBS will do the same. Marfrig will do the same. But this will completely change agriculture? No, this will not completely change, because this will create a double track agriculture. On one side, those companies will control their supply chain, their own supply chain. But some producers that are not inside the supply chain, those supply chains, they will continue to produce and they will continue to sell products to other companies that don't follow the same rules. So then we have in one side, part of the agriculture working above the law, and part of agriculture working below the law, correct? Because there is a still market for cattle and for soy that comes from illegal areas. And these products will not go to Carrefour or to PepsiCo or to Unilever. They will go to the internal market in Brazil. They will go to small slaughterhouses. They will go to black channels, correct? And what will happen in the long term? We are going to have a benchmark coming from the big companies that will be the future, or we are going to have a double track system where in one side, companies that are more related to international consumers, to capitalization, they do like a condominium for themselves, but the rest is like the situation of the very violent favelas, correct? So this is an analogy, correct? Because it happens in urban areas, this double track in Brazil, this double situation. And this could happen also in agriculture because of the pressures. So my concern is that if we don't have a strong public policy, we will never solve the problem. If we don't solve problems like illegal deforestation, fighting illegal deforestation, implementing the forest code, implementing the regularization of the land titles. If we don't have those policies, public policies, we will never solve the problem. We will just create a double track system, correct? Because most of the products will not go to Carrefour. We'll go to small slaughterhouses, small açougues, I don't know, meat sellers, you see, and this will not change the situation. To change the situation, we need to have the law enforcement coming from the government.
Okay, Marcus. I think it's very interesting. And I have another question from Sylvia Calmont, but I'm going to change it to make a more general questions. Because she's asking if we can have, it's possible to build economic solutions, because in your speech you just show technical solutions. You didn't show ecosystems, payments, economic ecosystem solutions. So she's asking if it's possible to build economic solutions in order to pay for economic service in Brazil. On what is the role of international funds. But before asking these questions, I'm going to ask some more general questions for the three lecturers. All of you just focalized on the importance of government. Nicola told that government is very important to the application of ecosystems service. Geraldine shows that without government, it's very difficult to work. It's working very differently in a country with an efficient government and in a country without government. And Marcus, you just told us that we need the government. So how do we do in a country where the government doesn't work? Is it possible to have some solutions? And I'm going to go back to the Sylvia questions. What is the role of international funds? Can they be part of these solutions?
Maybe I can try to give first response, but finally, Geraldine will tell better than me after that, because I think if I well understood your question, is more like what's happened if we don't have government, efficient government, okay? Finally, if I well understood the presentation of Geraldine, the question is not only about we need a government, but we need institution. It means institution, and Geraldine, you can correct me after that, but institution can be done by people itself, you know, kind of collective action, organize themselves collectively, but not depending on government, depending on their own rule. You know, they are developing the collective, people who develop their own rule, and then with that rule, you know, rule of managing the common resource, the rules that will guide them to well allocate the different benefits of these resources. So it's not a question of government simply, but a question of institution, and institution can be done by also the people itself. I'm wrong, Geraldine, maybe it's more on your topic, and you can say more about this. So I know we have some specialists at LEREPS on that, so maybe they can continue. But just to conclude, to me, it's not the question of government, the question of institutional organization, where people work together, develop new rules together to how to manage the common resource.
Okay, I try to make some compliments. Indeed, why PES works on Costa Rica, for example, and why it doesn't work in Africa. Costa Rica international funds or international institutions stopped the subversion to the forestral activity. So the state imagined a new solution to have funding and to finance the forestral sector. And it works because there is a kind of collective perception of this necessity. And forestral actors change their perception also towards ecosystem services, and thinks it's a kind of richesse, wellness, voilà. So indeed, the collective action works well in Costa Rica. But in Africa, states are more fragile, and international actors, international institutions want to implement PS like in Costa Rica, but it doesn't work because it is not the same institutional arrangements, it is not the same institutional context, it is not the same institutional context. The actors are not the same, and we can not take a solution from one country to put it in another country like this, like this. So for me, with all the research, I think, but it's my opinion, that the state is necessary, not sufficient, but necessary to implement. And more than there is one best solution and so on, it's a kind of policy mix to implement. Not only payments for environmental services, but also with law, with other economic incentives, and so on. It depends on the area and the problematic.
I think, Marcos, you can complement also with the last part of the question of Sylvia.
Let me try to answer from the points that Nicola made about institutions versus organizations. If we don't have strong institutions, like it's the situation of Brazil on the agro-environmental issue, the private sector will try to do or try to replace the government in the implementation of the law. And this is what I told you that's happening, correct? Because I would say that the most important problem of deforestation in Brazil is linked to the public policies, to lack of law enforcement, to new laws or new regulations that would allow PSA payments for environmental services or carbon markets, and also public-private partnerships. Unfortunately, it's the private sector that's not working well here in Brazil, first of all, especially now, where we still have a situation where there's many conflicts of interests in Brasilia, correct? In terms of what to do. For example, I see that there are different parts of the government doing good and bad things, correct? So unfortunately, there's a lack of coordination on the public area. But on the private area, on the private sector, which is the area that I'm doing research today and I'm working with, the solutions are there, correct? Bioeconomy, what's bioeconomy? Translation, is to have value to the forest as it is. Because today the value of the forest for 1 million farmers in the Amazon biome is to cut the forest and to sell the wood and to produce some cattle. But this is not good in the long term, correct? This is not good even for agriculture in the long term, because we have the problem of climate change and becoming worse and worse. So I believe that bioeconomy could be a solution, but then you need to have people that can organize, for example, the food chains, the production chains for products like cacao, like acai, etc. You see, and this is still very, very small. The forest is very rich in biodiversity, but we have not been able to convert this biodiversity into market solutions, keeping the forest as it is. This is one of the solutions. The other solution is what I told you that's happening to Cargill and to ADM. They are doing monitoring, traceability, and certification. Traceability means that it's not enough to track the beef, the cattle that arrives in the slaughterhouse, the direct suppliers. You needed to track the whole process of production of cattle, from the calves, from the cows to the all different steps of the cattle production, which happens in several farms. Sometimes it's not the same farm that produces one cattle head. There are several farms in this process, and sometimes some farms are not clean in terms of deforestation. We can intensify the technologies that I mentioned to you, especially in the pasture areas. We can do restoration. We can have jurisdictional approaches. There's some very good examples here in Brazil. We can implement ESG metrics and benchmarks. We can have the carbon market working. We can have payment for environmental services. We can have agroecological zonings, you see. So there's dozens of solutions in the market, private solutions and public-private solutions, let's say like that, correct? And the companies are studying all those possibilities. I think that we are going to be able to create zero deforestation supply chains from big companies, from big producers, but this will not solve all the problems. As I told you before, we can have a double-track agriculture, double-track agriculture chains. The investment funds that Sylvia mentioned, and it's very good to see Sylvia here. We were colleagues at the university. I believe that those tracks. Just a minute. I'm losing you here. I believe that those international funds and international pressure will come to the part of the chain that's clean. Correct? It's possible to identify today the players that will receive international funds, the players that will be linked to Carrefour and to big companies, but this is not the whole system, correct? And there is a part of the system that works without international funds, without money from international funds, or without bank credits. For example, the big banks in Brazil, they are creating systems to control the credits, the rural credits in the Amazon biome. Very, very rigid systems. And they will implement that. But there are producers in the Amazon that will produce without official credits or without bank credit. They will find other ways to continue. Because in some cases, deforestation is not related to agricultural production. It's related to land titles. It's related to posse da terra. How do you say posse da terra? If you go to these areas, 50 million hectares that we have with land that that have no titles, that have no owners, it's invasions, illegal invasions. So these guys are not worried about international funds or about public funds or about private sector pressures. You see, they are doing their invasions because they want to have the land to try to have titles one day, and then to sell this land for something much more than what they paid or what they just invaded. You see, so this is I believe that the problem is the illegal part, and the illegal part, unfortunately, is 98% of the deforestation. See, and the illegal part is not worried about what Carrefour thinks or what international funds are trying to do. You see, it's another equation, and unfortunately, it's an equation that needs law enforcement to be solved. When we reduced our deforestation from 27,000 square kilometers to 4,000 or 5,000, it happened because we had command and control. If we don't have command and control in an immense area, because remember that the Amazon biome, it's probably the size of Europe, Western Europe. It's very, very big. And it's very difficult to control because there's a lot of crime there. There's drug dealers, there's illegal people working with, trying to get wood or things like that, you see. And unfortunately, this is still happening in this region.
Okay, Marcus. I think I'm going to read what Professor Kefaliakos wrote, because I think it's everything to see with what you just said. He is writing that the problem is how to change the values institution of the government, but also of the different actors. So you're saying you need command and control, but it's very difficult. And the problem, it's the value of people, because they think better to cut the trees in order, for example, to apply the legal framework. So he told that we need to change the value of government, of people, actors, to apply the legal frameworks, and also to change these legal frameworks. Or maybe I'm going to ask something, because all of you told us about the importance of government, of command and control, and ecosystem service. And one of the actors, maybe the most important, is the consumers. And you, Marcos, you told us that, okay, but if we sell to China, we need to worry too much with environment. And Geraldine and Nicolas also, they told about the importance of consumer. And the question is, in a country like poor countries, where consumer is more short time consumer, so he is preoccupied about short time, not about the future. And ecosystem preservation is a matter of letting to do something today to preserve something in the future. So in a country like a poor country like Brazil, for example, how do we make for people starting to work with preservation and to think about short term and not only about long terms? Don't know, maybe I'm going to go back to Nicolas, after that Geraldine, and after that Marcos also.
Yes, and this raises also the question of the consumer, but also the geographical scale. Ecosystem services are providing locally when the benefit can be seen far from the production. But the consumer, from the consumer side, if I well understand, you talk about the preservation of ecosystem passing by the
most of, not
consumer.
all of them, but most of the preservation. Geraldine talked about the voluntary ones. You will begin to sell someone for a consumer, so consumer is going to pay for this. Or you need to make some pressure for the government to change the values. So
Yeah.
how do we make to have some more consent for the consumer? Because we know that without the consumer, we're not going to have preservation.
I don't know. We have many. We have different responses on that. One of this is we made this study in the south of France near Toulouse, where we try to evaluate the impact of pollinators, the willingness to pay of consumers and citizens in general to protect pollinators. We did a kind of a combination of a method. It means we interview people individually first, and second, we group all the people in one room and discuss all together on the value of pollinators. So, behind, among this person, there were half that was consumer and the other half that was farmers. And when we interview people and you have the point of view of people individually, they will give a value to pollinator, but under their own knowledge, under their own life experience. And finally, they just evaluate bees because the insect is nice, is sympathetic, etc. And then when they don't understand totally all the service and the benefits from pollinators. And once we gathered everyone in a group and they deliberate together, they discuss on the importance of bees for their society, they can understand many things. If you remember, I presented to you the ecological function part, this biological process that provide the ecosystem services. But then when people discuss together, they first are sharing the information, their knowledge, but also they create some social rules together. It means they can first explain and understand the complexity of this biological process. And second, they can develop some priorities to protect pollinators. So it means they don't stay only at the level of protecting pollinators because they provide food. No, they decide to protect pollinators because they are at the basics. They are at the basis of more important things. So when you talk about talking about consumers and how to raise their awareness to protect ecosystem services, the method is first to let them, give them the chance to work, to discuss together, to deliberate locally, and to understand, not only to provide new knowledge, but to understand the functioning behind all this, the functioning of the ecological function. So this means that what is important is first education. So it's what the study, raises issue is education. Educate people about the functioning of ecosystem services and the functioning of ecosystems. So education is important, and yes, include people, citizens in general, in the discussion of why we should manage a common resource and how we can manage a common resource. This is why it is important to not consider one person individually, but to consider a group of persons, including farmers and consumers, to me, in the same time.
Okay, Nicolas, that was very interesting. Thank you. Oh, Geraldine, you have something to tell about this?
It's yes, I think indeed all the actors are important. The combination of private sector, consumer, local community, states, and so on. And indeed, if I take the payments for environmental services, the aim is to cover an opportunity cost for the provider of environmental services. And the provider of environmental services are farmers and forestal sector and so on. So if this opportunity cost is covered, there is a kind of mechanism that works. But if it was not, it doesn't work. So,
Geraldine, if you'd like to, if I can try to translate.
Dans les paiements pour services environnementaux, les consommateurs sont souvent inclus. Mais c'est vrai qu'en réfléchissant, c'est surtout dans des cas dans les pays des Nord, en fait, et très peu dans les pays des Sud. Dans les pays des Sud, c'est vraiment les communautés locales, alors qui sont aussi consommatrices, mais elles sont productrices dans les services environnementaux. C'est comme ça qu'elles sont envisagées, quoi. Et finalement, comme ça, en réfléchissant, je connais peu de dispositifs avec des consommateurs dans les pays des Sud. Voilà, c'était ça en gros que je voulais dire.
So, looking back at the different examples Geraldine knows of payments for ecosystem services, she assumes, she perceives that in the North, in the global North, consumers are commonly associated with the different initiatives, whereas in the global South, it's not really the case. It's more about including the local communities, which are who are consumers, but I guess more because they live there, they are residents, and not necessarily because they are consumers, but more because they belong somehow to the place.
Et parce que c'est elles qui exercent effectivement des activités économiques qui permettent aussi de préserver les services.
Because they are the users of the different resources, like they develop these economic activities.
Yeah, let me complement. Let me start saying about the consumers in North and South countries, as it was mentioned by Geraldine. I think that we needed to really have a global approach and not an European approach. I know that Europe is very important in terms of public opinion, also very important in terms of the funds that we have today for ESG and for sustainability. But let's remember that the real consumers for a country like Brazil are not in Europe or the US. They are in Asia and Africa, and the volumes are growing so fast. Let me talk about two products that Brazil exports that have a lot of criticism in Europe: beef and sugar. Correct, beef and sugar. Brazil is number one in beef, number one in sugar today. In Europe, people don't want to eat beef because of climate change, because of animal health, because of nutrition issues. There's a strong movement of vegetarians and vegans, and they are trying to find a solution to have animal-free meat, meat from vegetable meat or lab meat. In sugar, people are very strong campaigns against sugar consumption, etc. And this is absolutely a reality in Europe, a reality in US, a reality in São Paulo City, a reality in Singapore, in Tokyo. But see, if we put all those consumers together, they represent probably 1 billion people in the world, 1.5 billion people that are trying to reduce consumption of beef and sugar. Probably this number is okay. But we have other 6 billion people or 6.5 billion people that want to eat more beef and more sugar because their consumption is very low. In Europe, you are consuming 120, 130 kilos of meat per capita a year. In Brazil, 100 kilos. In Asia, less than 20 kilos. In Africa, less than 10 kilos. Sugar, we are consuming 70 kilos per capita a year here in Brazil. In Africa, it's 5, 10. So most of the population, especially when they move to cities, urbanization, when they have per capita income increase, they want to eat more beef or poultry or pork or sugar. Sugar is increasing consumption in Bangladesh or in, so people needed to understand that the world have different speeds, different drivers, depending on their situation. So because of that, I don't like at all when a leader says, let's ban Brazil, or let's ban, I don't know, beef. Instead of banning, I would say, let's monitor. Let's find zero deforestation supply chains. Let's create solutions of inclusion and not exclusion. And this is the case in the Amazon. We have people there. These people there in the Amazon, more than 20 million people in the Amazon biome, they are there because there was incentives to go to the Amazon in the past. And Amazon is probably one of the richest areas in the world in terms of biodiversity and vegetation. It's one of the poorest areas of the world in terms of people. The lowest IDH, HDI, actually in English, levels in Brazil is exactly in the Amazon biome. So if we don't understand that when we say ESG, is ESG, it's not only E, correct? If we don't understand that we needed to balance environmental challenges with social challenges and governance challenges together, we will never solve the problem, correct? We never solve the problem. And unfortunately, we are not able to balance those things. So just to conclude about this, I believe that there's a lot of concerns about the environmental challenge in the Amazon or in the Cerrados. We needed to understand the social much better and do more for the social part, trying to find solutions. And the G, the governance. And the governance means what? Economic incentives to fight deforestation. Payment for environmental services, jurisdictional approach, intensification, certification. So if we have a value for zero deforestation products, a real value coming from consumers, things will change. And we can learn with other experiences. For example, let's give I've been talking to Olivier about that. France is a very rich country in terms of what you call appellation d'origine contrôlée, geographic indication. It's a fantastic country in terms of finding solutions of value-added products using geographical approaches, correct? Famous in the whole world, from water to champagne to cheeses and whatever. For example, let's say Mato Grosso do Sul. Mato Grosso do Sul has one of the most sensitive biomes of Brazil, is Pantanal. Pantanal is a marvelous place. Why don't we have appellation d'origine contrôlée from the products of Pantanal? Correct? There's a huge potential. Huh?
We have one.
One. But you see, there's a huge potential to create products that will have a value in the market in Brazil, a value in the market in France, that will be linked to ecotourism, to ecosystems in the Pantanal. It's not the Amazon, it's very close to where people are now in Campo Grande, you see? So I think that those kind of solutions are, in my opinion, the real long-term solutions that we need. For sure, we need public policy, as I told you before, but the real solutions will come from economic incentives and organization or coordination of the agri-food chains, what you call filière agro-industrielle. So this is what we need here in Brazil.
Okay, Marcus. I was seeing Michael wanted to have one more question, but I see, Michael, I don't know. I think what we can see here is we just opening the debate. We have a lot of things to discuss. I think this is not going to be the end of the conversation between both institutions. Marco just said about the Pantanal. We were talking with friends on UFMS just to start some kind of cooperation with Pantanal, for example, with indication geographic indications. I think it can be something to work here. I think because it's time, we promised we were going to finish our presentation at 11 o'clock. But if you have some more questions, you can send them to Michael, to Rachel, and to me, and we're going to transmit to the lecturers. But I don't want to pass the time because I'm a little British. We have to start at 9 and to finish at 11 o'clock. I think we just today open the debate. The objective of the meeting was to find something to have some conversation between two countries, but it's not the end of the conversations. We saw a lot of very interesting things to discuss. So what I propose to you is to close the debate today. And if you were, I hope everybody liked what we did today, but I think it's just the first one. So after that, I'm going to let Michael and Rachel to speak a little if they want. But for me, I'm going to thank you very much, and I hope you liked this debate today. Thank you very much.
I completely agree with you. This is just the beginning. We had a lot of interesting discussions. A lot of topics have emerged. So there will be a lot of opportunities to build on what has been said and continue the discussion. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the next debate in fall 2021.
So no things to add. Thanks everybody, and thanks Olivier, because this debate is an idea and a proposition from Olivier. So we really want to thank Olivier for the first step, and we hope to follow with the next seminar and other subject in December. We hope all together in the same place, in one place in Brazil and one place in France. I think we all hope for this, and thank everybody. If Marcos or Geraldine or Nicolas wants to just add a very few words to finish. So Geraldine say, okay, it's a visual word, but it's perfect. Thank you, Geraldine. Thanks, Nicolas.
Marcos, you want to tell something?
No, thank you very much. We have a center here at the INSPER Institute, which is one of the top schools in Brazil on business, economics, law, and engineering. But we have an agri-food center here, working on food systems and sustainability and global issues of agriculture. So we are fully available for you to continue these discussions and to work together on topics like, for example, sustainability and agro-environmental issues. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marcos. Nicolas?
Yes, thank you very much. Also, I can say it was very interesting, and I hope, as I wrote it on the chat, I hope one day we can meet directly in Brazil or directly in France all together for a big seminar of more than 2 hours, but for one day. Thank you very much.
But let's work together to do this. Okay, so thank you, everybody. So, and if you have some more things to speak, to ask, please send an email, and you're going to communicate to the lecturer. So thank you, everybody, and bye-bye.